Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show that helps you upgrade your lead generation. We are 2 episodes into a series on summer marketing books. If you didn't catch the previous one, please go back and check it out. For this episode, though, we are really lucky. We are going to talk about AI. You probably have some questions about whether it's going to take over our jobs as career marketers, whether we ought to be turning to data scientists for this work, basically where we go to have things that we're working on helped by AI. Well, I've got just the person to help. Our guest is an authority on analytics, digital marketing, and marketing technology. He's a recognized thought leader and a best-selling author and a keynote speaker. He's been named by IBM as a champion in their IBM Analytics tool. He is co-founder and chief data scientist for Trust Insights, which is a Boston-based digital analytics firm. He's also co-host of the very long-running Marketing Over Coffee podcast. He's also run the marketing for a series of startups in financial services and SaaS and the public relations industries. Our guest, as you might have guessed, is Christopher S. Penn. He's the author of AI for Marketers, a primer and introduction, which is just out in its 3rd edition. And I'm really fortunate to have a chance to sit down with him, listen for where he takes us through the steps that a company should be looking for to get themselves from where they are now to completely embracing AI as a core competency. You won't want to miss this one. Let's go join Chris. Well, I'm really pleased to have with me Christopher S. Penn today. How you doing, Chris?
You know, I'm alive, I'm above ground, and I'm vertical. In these days, that's really all you can ask for.
That's true. You can't count on much. Oh, good point. So it's been a real delight going through your book. And the name of the book is AI for Marketers, an introduction and primer. Now, start me off on this right foot here. It says it's the 3rd edition of this book. So I'm guessing that there were editions number 1 and 2, and maybe even something before that. How did this all happen?
So the book originally was a series of 9 blog posts. So back in the day, this was 2017, I think. Ann Handley had said, "Can someone please explain AI, for marketing in an easy way?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be easier than a lot of the very technical stuff." So I ended up writing a series of blog posts, and then I was like, this wouldn't be bad to sew these together and turn it into an ebook. And so that's what I did. The first edition was nothing more than, copy pasted blog posts together. And it was really short. It wasn't even technically a book. At that point, it's probably just like a really long white paper. Then fast forward 2 years to 2018 was the next year. I republished it. I said, okay, I'm going to go through it and tune this up and things. And I opened it up and just started writing. I'm like, wow, A, everything I wrote was out of date, and B, it's not coherent. So I ended up doing a from ground up rewrite for the 2nd edition. And then this past wintertime, because I typically take the week between Christmas and New Year's off and look at what kind of interesting content projects should I create, when it's nice and quiet. And I went back and I reread the 2nd edition, and I was like, somebody should have told me that I had this big a stick up my ass when I wrote this. It was so, the language was so formal, unnecessarily so, and especially for a topic like AI where you're trying to make it more accessible for people. So basically hit, okay, let's paste this into a document, just start rewriting again. And again, with AI is one of those fields where so much changes that 2 years between rewrites was actually too long. I put this out in February of 2021, and I can already tell you there's some sections that are now out of date, and it's June. Some amazing things have been happening with natural language generation in the past 3 or 4 months. It's like, wow, there's some really big changes. And, it's hard, particularly when someone has a dead tree in their hand, to say there's an update to this. So I imagine probably I'm going to end up doing almost like an annual revision, or at least additions. Okay, now for this coming edition, this is what's going to change. The other thing that was ridiculous was in the second edition, I couldn't get the table of contents to work. So I finally got working in the third edition.
Yeah, no, you did. And it was helpful. I'll pause just to underline, and I'm speaking mainly to myself, that if someone hasn't read a book on marketing AI, to know that you're slagging yourself for a book that you have rewritten twice in, 4 odd years, that I think should be impetus enough to people to understand that it is changing so quickly that, at least read one. Okay. But, ideally you should be reading and keeping up to date on this, like you said, at the cadence of every other year or maybe even every year.
That's right. I mean, the technology, what's happening, it's interesting. It's sort of split into two ways. There's the technical advances themselves with the research that's being done, the code that's being released and stuff that a lot of marketers won't see, and they shouldn't see it. They don't need to see it, but they need to know that what's happening so that they can eventually figure out what will trickle down to the applications they use every day. And then there's the second road, which is tools that you use in marketing every single day are being impacted by this. So if you use the brand new Google Analytics 4, for example, that is a tool that is very heavily influenced by AI, by what Google's doing in the background. If you are an SEO practitioner, you know the pain of AI because it's being done to you by Google. Google's new multitask unified model that they just announced at Google I/O this year, which is about 4 weeks ago as we record this, is going to drastically change everything that you know about SEO. It's a completely different way of thinking about SEO. So part of what I think is important for marketers to realize is you need at least some of the basic language and technical, the rudimentary technical understanding. Like you don't need to be able to, for example, take apart a blender and put it back together to know what a blender does, but you should probably know what a blender does before you try and use it. Don't stick your hand in there, for example. And the same is true with AI. You don't need to know, for example, what's a softmax layer or in a deep learning network, but you should know AI will do things to your data, to your audiences, to your marketing. And if you want to work with it, you'll get better results than trying to fight against it.
Yeah. So let's actually delve into that because that's right where you start the book. It's not like many other areas where, let's say, I don't know, gardening, the amount of innovation in gardening isn't so great. You could pick up a book that's, 10 years old and just follow along. But that pain that you mentioned with big tech titans doing things to us, that's where you start the book. I like to think that books about these futuristic things are like Star Trek, where they maybe start off with a bright and shiny utopic vision of, here's all the great stuff that's going to happen. You don't do that at all. You give us the cold shower where you say, wait a minute, this isn't utopia. This is more like hell. Because right now, marketing with these, big things that are coming at us, it's causing marketing to be poor quality, to be slow and more expensive, all the human-based marketing. So, are you telling us that we don't have a choice?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, the choice is already gone. Like you don't have a choice. You have no influence over how Facebook's newsfeed algorithm works. You have no influence over how Instagram's algorithm works. Most of the engineers of those companies also don't know how those things work, because one of the most critical points to understand about AI and machine learning is that what these things are pieces of software, just like Microsoft Word, right? Or Excel or Candy Crush or whatever. They're pieces of software. The difference is those are pieces of software, by and large, written by people like you and me. Engineers write code, turns into software. AI and machine learning is software written by machines. Machines are given a big bunch of data and some starting algorithms and are told, go and write software that accomplishes whatever goal is being put in front of them. There's two basic goals, right? There's either figure out, a classification, like what's in the box, or regression, which is tell me what's important. And the machines go and write their own software, which means that when you look at Google search algorithm or the Instagram feed or YouTube or any of these things, Nobody human has ever fully taken apart the machine written software to understand how it works. We can understand pieces of it and we can understand the outputs of it, but there is no one person walking around who says, I can tell you exactly what Google's algorithm is, because nobody at Google knows that.
Yeah, it's outstripped the speed and volume which our human brains can handle. And
exactly.
you begin right there, right? You say, and spoiler alert, there are a couple of steps, but let's just start with the foundation step that you start us with, which is data. And there's so much of it, but maybe if you could take a second and tell me where we should, I'm a corporate marketer. Let's say I've got data around, but where would you point me first? What would some of the first places, and should I think that the data in its current format is usable immediately for AI, or is it not quite ready? You kind of compared it to oil, so I'm interested in hearing about that.
I would actually say there's a step before that. Maybe this will go in the 4th edition, which is, should you be using AI to solve whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve first? It's very telling. When you read Google's developer handbook, which is public, it's available to the public. They firmly say they are an AI first company. Wherever problems are appropriate, they will try to use AI because it scales better than people. But in the very first chapter of that book, the guideline for engineers says, if you don't have to use machine learning, don't, because it's computationally more expensive than classical programming. So when we talk about the journey to AI for companies, yes, there's going to be some machine learning along the way somehow. Maybe it's something you build, maybe it's something that an agency brings in, maybe it's a piece of software. But is the problem you're trying to solve a machine learning problem? Remember, machine learning problems do two things. Machine learning does two things. It classifies stuff, sorts it into buckets, and it tells you what's important, or combinations thereof. There are plenty of problems that machines are really bad at. Like, for example, machines cannot think across domains yet. They're getting closer with some of these unified models. But for right now, they cannot be purely creative. They need to have data to work with. So to your question about the data that you have, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. Are you trying to solve something like, what's the ROI of my marketing? Then yes, there's some statistical and machine learning techniques that will probably help. Are you trying to solve, what's the strength of my brand? Then yes, there's some very good regression techniques that you can use to get at that. But you've got to figure out what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then see, do you have the data? I like to compare it to cooking, right? Let's say you want to make a pizza.
Yep.
Right? So you need 4 things. 1, you need ingredients, right? So you have no flour and cheese and tomato sauce, you're not making a pizza, right? If you've got sand, you're not making a pizza.
Right.
2, you need a recipe, because if you've never made pizza before, it's going to be really interesting to watch you experiment. What's that? It's a cube. That's not
That's right. You're
Number
doing it
3,
wrong.
Exactly. Number 3, you need tools, right? You need something. A mixer is probably helpful. An oven would be helpful. Things like that. And number 4, you need a person with skills. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's somebody you hire. But you need a person who can actually do the making of the pizza. So it's tools, data, recipe, and skills. When we talk about data in a marketing organization, that's one of the things. That's the ingredients, right? So yes, I think it's very important for you to say, do I have the ingredients? Are they good ingredients, right? Like if all you have is moldy flour, then you're going to make a really bad tasting pizza, no matter how skilled you are. But those other 3 things are just as important. Do you have the tools? You may not. Do you have the people? You may not. Do you have a recipe? You may not. And if not, then you need to take a step back and say, how do I fulfill all 4 of these things in order to be able to take this journey towards AI?
Yeah. And so, yes, we need to have that data. We should perhaps imagine that we need to resource the people who will be, that will be preparing that data. So in the book, you compare it to oil, right? And you say, think about crude oil we pull out of the ground. So yes, it's great. And, even if you have a lot of it, that's fantastic. But that doesn't mean that you're pouring it into your gas tank and driving away, right? So there's a lot of refining. We have to think about that. And you talked about kind of the narrow applications of AI. We have to remember, it doesn't look at, if it looks at June 16 and, we've dropped the E off, and that's because we like to write shorthand, that's enough to throw a system off from knowing that that's even a date.
Exactly. I was actually just doing a demo yesterday with IBM Watson Studio. I would do a lot of work with IBM, and they have this new thing called data refinery, and it's very funny because it actually is very much using AI to extract data you have and start doing some of that processing for you, like looking at your labels. Like, if you misspelled June or you misspelled September, it can spot obvious things that are wrong. If there's a whole bunch of fields where there's just a bunch of zeros, like maybe you don't need this variable because it's all zero. And look for things that are known mathematical issues. So there are definitely tools that are starting to evolve that are bringing that refinery idea to life. And it's going to take some time. They're not perfect. We were working with the Titanic data set yesterday in this demo. And I was like, it had gone back and flagged a whole bunch of things is wrong. I'm like, I know this data set pretty well. Most people who work in data science have worked with it at some point. Generally speaking, women who were in first-class cabins survived, right, on the Titanic, because women and children first, and the first-class cabins were the first ones to get evacuated to the lifeboats.
Okay.
And so this software that was trying to infer, like, say, hey, I think you might have mislabeled some data. I'm like, no, you did. We didn't. We know that those two things, being female and being in a first-class cabin, were strong predictors of you surviving. And so the software's got a ways to go, and that's one of the reasons why, as marketers, we're going to have a supervisory role over AI to say, like, what you just spit out does not make sense, or what you spit out makes logical sense. Let's keep going with what it is that the machine is spitting out. Right.
Or it makes sense when you provide the condensing that it's done with your own common sense. And you did a comparison, and I thought it was great because it illustrated how well the system can handle some of those lower levels. You have a 7-step process for how you get into it, but you took an example with the marketing Twitter hashtag and a whole lot of tweets that went on things. And it was, you pointed the AI at it and asked it to find some things. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was able to find, and then kind of that spark of human understanding that took what it could find and actually made something actionable?
So that was an example, if I recall correctly, of network graphing, using graphing databases to understand what's happening within a network. And networks are central to marketing. Even if you've never heard the term graph network or network database, these things intuitively, right? They are your friends on Facebook, your friends on Instagram, the people you follow on Instagram, the people you comment on LinkedIn, the channels you subscribe to on YouTube. And a network is anything where there's interactions between different entities. So you and that YouTube channel, you follow that YouTube channel, or you leave a comment there, or somebody leaves a comment on your channel, and you create these networks. Twitter is probably the most common example of this, where you can tweet and retweet and copy and reply to people. And those interactions are where the value is, because when you start mapping those out, well, I should more say when your software starts mapping those things out, you can start to identify who are the nodes, the people within this network that seem to have more influence, in the sense of more people interact with them, they interact with more people share their stuff. And from a marketing perspective, when we talk about influencer identification, we're very much talking about who are those people that either are the ones who can broker introductions to somebody, who are just loud and just have a million people following them, or for classical influencer marketing, who are the people that everybody else talks about? I have probably more gray hair than most marketers. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was these TV commercials for a financial services company, E.F. Hutton. And the whole tagline was, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. And, it's this guy on his train, he starts talking to his friend. Like, everyone on the train stops talking and starts staring at him like, what's he saying? That's an example of an influencer, somebody who they may or may not have 1 million followers, but when they do say something, everybody pays attention. And when you take a hashtag like marketing Twitter, you can not only see who's talking the most, but you can see who's talked about the most. And who's talked about the most may not be the person who does the most talking, but they're the person whose thoughts, when you talk about thought leadership, identifying those people who their thoughts get taken and shared and turned into memes and whatever, that's who you want to find, because those are the people, if they start talking about you and your company and your brand and your services, will probably have an outsized influence on people going to check you out. So the analysis we do with the marketing Twitter is just because it's an easy public feed to follow, but you can find who are the individuals in that conversation that are really have outsized influence. You can also find out who's just talking to the air. Like, this person tweets 100 times, during each chat, but nobody interacts with them.
That's right. And you would be just wasting your time and using maybe that vanity metric to make a decision when it would totally take you in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
So that kind of falls under, you mentioned in step 2, measurement and analytics. You're moving up to step 3, insights and research. And then this one with step 4, you called process automation. And that's where scale comes in. And where at that point in the book, you were talking about how you had also done something that I could imagine a company doing on a quarterly basis, where they're taking something like that same marketing Twitter data set, but you're figuring out when it would make sense to talk about certain things. And if your quarterly marketing, content calendar needs to be set up, I can't think of a better way where instead of just putting a wet finger in the air, you would use something like this to help you understand, if you had courses, when someone is, ready with budget dollars in hand to buy those courses.
Yeah, so that's predictive analytics. Predictive analytics is a form of machine learning. It is forecasting, which a lot of folks do. And it's, in this case, using information that you're gathering from your marketing data to understand when are things likely to happen. Predictive analytics is probably one of the most overlooked parts of classical machine learning, because it seems so boring. Right? It's like, okay, I'm just going to take this time series for 5 years worth of data, whatever, and forecast it forward a year. What people don't realize is that it's not the technology that's the cool part. The technology is pretty well established for this discipline. It's like 70 years old now, but it's the application that we're not doing in marketing. So
right.
One of my favorite things to do is to look at and forecast search terms around out of office, right? Out of office auto reply, Outlook out of office, Gmail out of office, right? Looking at the search trends around those. And then forecasting forward, what weeks of the year will people be searching for these things the most? Because what you know from psychology and from good old common sense is that if you're searching for Outlook out of office, it's not for fun. It's because you're about to go out of the office and you need to remember how to turn this thing on, right? Well, what happens after that? You may be going on vacation, you may be on holiday, who knows? But whatever it is, you ain't reading email, which means that as a marketer, I should not be sending email to you when search volume for that term is high, right? Conversely, I should be sending email to people and doing bigger campaigns when that search volume is at its lowest points throughout the year, because that's when people are in the office. And there's some cyclicality and seasonality to that. But by forecasting it ahead of time, we can plan our calendar 3 months, 6 months, 9 months out and say, like, okay, these are the weeks we've got to have campaigns in the market. These are the weeks, take the week off. Nobody's reading their email.
The boring part of this, it makes me chuckle because it isn't so boring. If we look at some of the largest industries and the oldest industries, agriculture, meteorology, insurance, they are based on the ability to predict. It might be time for marketing to get on that bandwagon.
Just a thought.
Maybe. When you kind of stop at that process automation, you put a real important, coda there in the middle of your progression. And that stop sign says, before proceeding to steps 5, 6, and 7, you want to think about whether or not AI is going to be built as a core competency of your company. So tell me a little bit more about why you make that distinction and why you actually are putting, it's surprising to me that somebody would put the brakes on it, but tell me why. What is a company committing to if they really do want to take it the rest of the way?
So to do AI well, you need 3 things, right? Well, 4 things. You need engineering capability, right? You need computational power, being able to do things. You need the ability to take the products of AI software to market, which is really important because it's like making a bunch of binders that nobody reads if you don't do that. And you need the business case for it. So in those arenas, you have a lot of very, very expensive things. A good AI engineer, salary wise, is at least six figures, sometimes depending on their skill and their capabilities, maybe mid six figures. Like some of the folks who are the best of the best in Silicon Valley and stuff are commanding $500,000 a year, right? Because they know what the heck they're doing. That's not a small investment. The work that your company needs to do to re-engineer its data for usage with AI is not small. It's not insignificant, depending on the application. And so the big question is, are you going to be pursuing AI for your core competency? Like, this is going to be part of your secret sauce, and you've got to make your software unimpeachable and something that you own that no one else can hold you hostage over? Or is it something that you're just going to make your marketing, incrementally better, like, optimizing send times of emails or things like that? In that case, yeah, you can outsource it, right? You don't have to hire people and bring in teams and stuff like that to make improvements and not make AI a core part of your offering. So if you think about this, like, there was a company, American Airlines had a booking system. This is before AI, publicly, but it's a good example. And American Airlines was so good at travel booking that they developed a system called Sabre, the Sabre booking system, which eventually was so good it actually became its own company. It was so good, and it was that licensed itself out to a bunch of other airlines. And so that's in a case where they use technology not just as an incremental thing to make business slightly better, but it was so good it was transformative, and it was good enough to become its own company. If you could think about something, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Sabre itself was something that their competitors subscribed to. That's how good it was, that the other guys ditched their reservations and load factoring systems just to hop on Americans. And yeah, that's a wonderful example of what you're speaking about with, all right, we're prepared to basically, whatever our service or offering was before, we're going to burn the boats. We're going to jump over into this thing and make it so good that even if our traditional rivals want to hop onto this, we're okay with that.
Exactly. For a more modern example, so my company, Trust Insights, we're a consulting company. But I wrote this piece of software that takes Google Analytics data and builds a multi-touch attribution model, because the one that comes to Google Analytics, I don't particularly like. Even though I like Google Analytics itself, I think the attribution tools is awful. And so I wrote this piece of software that builds a better attribution model. And I originally just wrote it for me. I want to try doing this thing. But now it's gotten to be so useful that it's now a service we offer to other companies to say, like, okay, we'll take your data, and as long as it's in good condition, it will spit out really good digital attribution models and say, like, this channel, is 14% of your conversions for this month. Is that commensurate with, did you put 14% of your budget in that channel? If you did, great. If you put 4% of your budget into that channel, guess what? Invest more because it's working. Did you put 40% of your budget in that channel? It might be time to pull back because you're paying too much for whatever conversions you got. So that's what we mean when we talk about, is this going to be something that's additive to your marketing? Outsource it. Is it going to be a bread and butter part of your marketing? Is it a core competency, a secret sauce? You got to build it.
Yeah. And there's another book that doesn't do it in the same way, but if people want to maybe think about other aspects where we do embrace this idea, I would point to content. So Joe Pulizzi and Robert Rose, they wrote a book, Killing Marketing, right? A little bit of a joking title, but they were kind of serious in the fact that if you're so good at, let's say, the content production part of your marketing, have you thought about becoming a media company?
Mm-hmm. Jay Baer, I was looking for the book on my bookshelf here. I don't see it. I think it must be behind some of the things. Jay Baer's book, Utility. Also,
same thing. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Is your marketing good enough that somebody would pay money for it?
Yeah. So crazy, but not so crazy to think that AI can play that same role for us in marketing, right?
Exactly.
The rest of it, when you're kind of getting up into the highest echelons of using machine learning and AI powered, you do talk about how, we have to be ready to stay critical of our systems at that point. Even if we've got a battery of data scientists and we think we're getting all of our questions answered, you speak about when AI can get something wrong. And sometimes the finger points back to a human being and not to the system that was designed for this. Can you tell me what you meant by that?
AI goes wrong actually a surprising amount of the time. Here's the thing. A lot of folks believe that AI is some kind of magic, and it is most assuredly not any form of magic. It is 100% mathematics, right? So it is only as good as the information that you put into the system. If you put in crap information, you're going to get crap out of it. Back to our baking analogy. If you have sand and you use sand in your cake, it doesn't matter how good your blender is, you're still making crap, right? You're still making a cake made of sand. And there's 6 points where AI can have problems. We mostly call this bias, right? Something where you have a result. Well, I should back up. There's 2 versions of bias, right? There's the human definition, which is prejudice in favor of or against something compared to something else, usually considered to be unfair. Like, so a piece of software that is biased against, say, Black Americans would be a human bias. And then there's the machine definition, which is something is biased if it's calculated in such a way that it is systematically different from the population parameter. So if you've done a survey and you vastly overrepresented one group, it's statistically different than the group as a whole. That's an example of machine bias. AI is very susceptible to both forms of bias because it's only as good as the data we put in it. And there's 6 points where corruption happens with AI. Number one, at the very beginning, is the people we hire, right? If you hire biased people, they will make biased software. There's just no way around it. 2 is your strategy. If you are asking a question that is inherently biased, you will create software, including machine-made software, that reinforces that bias, right? It's like, I remember in the last political thing of Bob, I got a survey from one of the candidates saying, what do you think of the job this politician's doing? Good, great, amazing. I'm like,
yeah. Or on the other side, the one I've heard is, hey, Chris, have you stopped kicking your dog? How do you answer that? Right?
Not today.
But the best answer is no answer because it's a biased question.
Exactly. The third place where bias creeps in is in data. And this is where one of the biggest problems. So bias in data comes from human experiences, right? Because the machines only get the data we give it. A really good example of this is that there is no good healthcare data for Black Americans. Zero. Because there's such systemic bias in society that all of their outcomes are wrong, right? They're always suboptimal. So that's a case where you have to actually, one of the ways to mitigate that is to actually take a portion of the majority of the population in the software, flip their racial identity. Right. It's like take a bunch of white Americans, turn them into data. Exactly. And say, okay, now we're going to treat that to try and figure out what is the optimal outcome. The fourth place is in algorithm selection. You can have biases be introduced by choosing the wrong algorithms or having the machines choose the wrong algorithms to use that are inappropriate for the problem being solved. The fifth is the model itself. This is drift. Models can drift as they're given more bad data. The most painful example of this is Microsoft created a Twitter robot named Tay back in 2016 that would learn from what people tweeted at it, and the internet being the internet turned it into a Nazi porn bot in less than 24 hours. So their model drifted without enough guidelines. And the sixth area where bias creeps in is in the actions we take from the outputs from the system, right? The system tells us one thing, we do something else because we don't like the answer it gave us. And so AI, again, it's just mathematics. Think about it like this. If you were to substitute the word AI for the word spreadsheet, right? Suddenly it becomes a lot more accessible. Like, okay, how would I use spreadsheets to solve this problem, right? How would I use spreadsheets to do this? And then some of the questions that people ask start to sound a little funny, right? Like, okay, can spreadsheets solve my love life? No.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good substitution. And it also, when you outline those 6 areas, it helps people understand that there are places, not only that it doesn't fit, but maybe places where it fits a little bit, but then you reach diminishing returns. The one I think of is doom scrolling. Okay, so if any of us have doom scrolled, and as the time we're recording this, the last 18 months of our lives has been rather full of opportunities to doom scroll with COVID. Those algorithms have only done what they were asked to do, but what that's caused people to do when that algorithm goes, you looked at something, and that was, maybe a very sensational headline about, the world pandemic. Let me go find you more of that. And, you do, and then more and more and more. Well, wait a minute. Is more better?
Here, that's a really good example, because it also emphasizes that the models, and this goes back to the people and strategy, the models, particularly, I will call out Facebook for this, are based on the company that creates them and the ethics and values. If you read Facebook's core values, they talk about move fast, break things, innovate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nowhere in any of their core values do they say, let's make the world a better place. Let's make people happier. Let's make people more kind. And so they've created systems that reflect their values, that do exactly what you said. They do exactly what they're told to do. They, within a singular objective, make you stay on their system and doom scroll some more. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why things like extremism and disinformation spread so easily, because we, the audience, are influenced by that very easily. The algorithms and the models have figured out, hey, if you want people to pay attention to you all the time, make them angry and afraid all the time. And so this software that Facebook has created is really good at making us afraid and angry all the time, so much so that we spend enormous amounts of time on it, and they can sell that time to advertisers.
Right.
Had they had, for example, some benchmark in there to say, hey, maybe let's also work on trying to make people happier, it might have had a very different outcome. A good counterexample of this is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, among other things, they actually let their data scientists talk to the public, which is great, talks about their algorithm, and they have 5 major counterweights in the algorithm that are, it's called a Pareto multi-objective optimization problem. It's basically they have 5 objectives, and each objective has to go into an arm wrestling match with the other objectives to try and balance things out. Engagement is 100% one of LinkedIn's measures, but another one is complaints. They pay attention to how many people complain or decrease in usage and things like that. And they say, okay, let's counterweight some of that. They look at 40% of LinkedIn's revenue comes from their HR systems. They don't want users leaving the service. And so if they suddenly see that there are topics or language that causes people to disengage, it's like, okay, that's got to get balanced out, because we cannot afford to have this gold mine that we sell to enterprise companies in our software to be spoiled by politics, for example. And so it's a really good example of a company that's doing it right by having multiple objectives that have to, if LinkedIn is not as engaging as Facebook, but it's a happier place to be.
Yeah, it's very good that you put that. And there are ways you talk in the book, and I'll just mention them, the ways that we can actually look at these algorithms. As you said, they're written by machines. And so while we may not know exactly what every line of the code says, we have the ability to hold these algorithms to some account. You talk about explainability and interpretability. And, I think those are good tools for us just to use as oversight. What do you think?
Explainability and interpretability. Let's go back to our cooking analogy. Let's say we're making a cake, right? Explainability is when the cake comes out of the machine, we pick up a fork, we taste it and go, that tastes like pretty good cake, right? It's moist, it tastes like chocolate and stuff like that. We don't know the ingredients of that cake, right? We don't know how it was made. All we know is that it tastes like cake and it seems good. We might find out, oh, by the way, this cake is filled with an allergen that we can't have. Surprise, the machine didn't know that.
Right.
But from casual sampling, we can say that's a pretty good cake. That's explainability. We look at what comes out of models and say, okay, that passes the sniff test. And for a lot of low risk applications, that's okay. Like if Amazon's recommending products to you and every now and again there's this product that's like, that makes no sense. Like, okay, I can live with that. Explainability is fine. Interpretability is when you look at every line of code, when you force some of these models to actually decompile themselves into millions of lines of code, and you go through and you look to see what's happening in each single stage. Companies, particularly big tech companies, hate this because it's extremely expensive and extremely computationally intensive. The equivalent is, if you were making that cake, you are watching the chef. You're standing next to the chef the entire process from the beginning to end. Oh, hey, it looks like you're putting like a teaspoon of salt there. Okay. Oh, that's baking powder, not baking soda. Oh, why'd you put tapioca flour in there?
Right.
And so you can, line by line, exactly what's happening. For high risk applications, aka anything you can get sued for, interpretability is the gold standard. And it is not long in coming, if it hasn't happened already, where a company will be brought before a court of law in a lawsuit where they have to provide an interpretable version of their models to say, we did not discriminate against Black people, for example. They will have to be able to prove that they did not, that their software did not do this.
Yes.
And if they can't, they're going to get their butts handed to them, rightfully so.
This is just that area, and I think this is kind of a new dawn for us. And I like how you kind of boil things down to something like spreadsheets, because when we do it that way, we can start to understand what we as humans really ought to be doing. We have to provide the guardrails for this. We have to, it's been, the comparison has been made with how our own communities work and, things like our roads and the speed of the stop sign, speed on the sign limits that we have to observe as we're driving. We will have to get into the governance of how these algorithms are working. We can't just have the Wild West. We can't just have, just like we wouldn't have people driving and making roads wherever they want to. We have to, provide a couple of standardized things and almost in a way have a constitution of, all right, here are our shared values. And here are the areas where, yes, we're going to maybe cause the AI to be 1 or 2% less efficient. But for the sake of the society that this AI is working in, we think that's a fair trade-off.
And where you're going to run into some issues is, again, in what constitutes those shared values, because we don't have agreement on that anymore.
No.
Real simple example of fairness. Like when we say, what does it mean to be fair? Right? A lot of the times we'll say things like impartial and just treatment without favoritism or discrimination. But there's different ways you can implement fairness. So let's say we're hiring. We're going to use an AI to get us, candidates for hiring. What would be fair? Some people would say, let's blind the applications. We remove all identifying data, and so everybody has an equal shot because we can't tell, based on somebody's name, oh, they're probably Korean, for example. That's one example of fairness. Second example of fairness would be representative parity. We want the applications that we receive for our hiring for to represent the demographics of the population. I used to work at an email marketing company that was based in Atlanta. There wasn't a single Black person on staff. And I'm like, this is Atlanta. 56% of the population is Black, and you don't have a single Black person on staff. So you telling me that you are a company dedicated to diversity or not? So representative parity would say, like, okay, if you believe in that version of fairness, 56% of your applications should be from Black people. The third would be equal opportunity. Everybody who is eligible should get a shot at whatever it is we're doing with AI, right? Hiring them. And then the fourth would be equal outcome, where everybody who's eligible gets the same outcome. We saw in the pandemic that a lot of people didn't understand equal outcome, but equal outcome is pretty simple. Everybody who wants a vaccine should get one, right? Yeah. If you don't want one, that's a separate argument. But if you want one, you should be able to get one. That's equal outcome. A lot of people like to call that socialism, but that's, again, a whole different topic. But you can see there's 4 different versions of fairness just in this thing. So when we say we want common values, well, what do we mean by these things? And is there a middle ground? I think it's going to be one of those things that we have to deal with as societies, but also as marketers for a long time. There's an example in the book of a company that developed this appalling software that tries to identify your ideal customers. And they were showing this off at the MarTech conference. And they had this map up of Boston. It was for a coffee company. And there were red dots for the areas where they thought the best customers were, and gray dots where they weren't. And they showed like financial district, Back Bay, Cambridge, where all your ideal customers, and then Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, where there's no ideal customers. And this is for Dunkin' Donuts. Now, if you don't know the demographics of Boston and New England, Boston and the greater New England area, everybody drinks Dunkin' Donuts, right? The only people who don't are
all faiths, creeds, colors, yeah.
Exactly. The other people who don't drink dunks are dead. And even then, you might have somebody like leaving the styrofoam cups on their gravestones. And so for this software to say there are no ideal buyers in the predominantly black areas of the city, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, this software is full of shit. The software is biased. And you know from common sense, you walk in any of those areas of the city, there's people with the styrofoam cups, the Dunks cups. In fact, you probably even see more of them. And so this is an example of a technology used for marketing that is discriminatory, and it needlessly, and it will actually harm the company because they'll make fewer sales. There was another really awful example. I was at a conference in Minnesota, and there's this presentation being given by an insurance company. And this insurance company said, we are not, under the law, we are prohibited from giving differential pricing on policies, right? Everybody has to get the same price for fairness reasons. They said, so here's how we worked around that. We only market in areas where we want customers from. And they showed a map, and of course, it was basically redlining. And like, you guys use technology to reinvent redlining.
People can go look that up. That was done a century ago. It's a despicable thing, and here we are just automating it.
Exactly.
There's such a good point here. And I suppose for anyone who is concerned about, people joke, they compare AI to Skynet and things like that. Your point that you've been making so well is simply, frankly, if there's anything that we do have to fear in this new age of AI, it's us.
Yes, exactly.
So we have to, if we boil it down to a marketer who's, the frustrations they've had with trying to get aligned with their sales team over what the definition of a lead is, be ready for many more of those conversations, because that's what is going to facilitate having any good principled AI happening in your company. And if you're not interested in this, maybe a different line of work. I want to finish on that because you made some great points just at the career level, not at the whole company level, but you kind of wove it into the book, points about what a individual marketer should be thinking about. Any parting thoughts on maybe how, no matter where they are in their career, they should try to look at AI and, imagine how it's going to impact what they do in their workaday job?
Again, artificial intelligence is about making things better, faster, and cheaper. Right? It is about automating processes. If your job is a single process, then you have a lot to worry about. I used to work at a PR firm, and one of the staff members on staff, their job was to copy and paste results from Google to a spreadsheet. I'm like, so that's a job that doesn't need to exist. And we could use that person for much more creative and innovative things than copying and pasting, right?
Yeah.
AI will take away individual tasks. That's something the Brookings Institute said very brilliantly. AI takes away tasks, not jobs. Now, if your job is one task, then you have a problem. But for most of us, our job is a series of tasks, and we're going to give more of these tasks away to machines. And instead of being the first violin, we'll be the conductor of the orchestra. Now, here's the catch. You only need one conductor of the orchestra. You don't need 15 or 20 of them. I was playing around with a new language model the other day. It's called GPT-J6B, which is a silly name, but it's a language generation model. And what I did was I took a press release, a boring press release from a plumbing company in Ohio. I just took the first two paragraphs and I put it into this AI model. I said, autocomplete the rest of the press release for me. And it did. It spit it out an autocompleted version. It guessed what the rest of the press release should be. it wrote a better press release than the original. The original is filled with like garbage quotes about like, the CEO says this is the quote by the CEO, and these are the things to look for, and here's our services that we offer. And the revised version said, and here's some tips to help plumbing problems stop. Don't plant trees 5 feet or closer to the house. Plant fruit and nut trees 12 feet away from the house further. Put down mulch so that it forces roots closer to the surface because they don't have to dig as deep for moisture. And I'm like, this press release that the machine created is actually better than what the humans created. And so that's an example of a task, right? Write a press release. Nobody likes writing press releases. So you could go to this press release, this software, give it the first paragraph or two to give it the idea of what to write, and let it do the thing. Now, as a marketer, you're not going to write it. You're just going to edit it. You're going to say, okay, it messed up here. It messed up here. It made up some name for our CEO instead of our CEO's actual name. But for the most part, it'll tune it. And then your job as the marketer is now to edit, to fine tune, to put into those guardrails like you were talking about earlier. And so we have to be thinking of ourselves as conductors of the orchestra, as the editors, the supervisors of the machines. Think of the machine as like the lowest level employee in your organization. You are the supervisor of it. And that's how you're going to thrive as a marketer in an AI-enabled world. The more that you can supervise and be a good manager of the machines, the more value you will add to your company.
And you've just given me a vision where, perhaps org charts change over time, and someone will, be listed not as having a staff of a couple of minions, but maybe GPT J6B is sitting underneath them on a box.
Exactly. And you know what? They don't take vacation time. They don't take sick time.
Right.
They work around the clock.
And they work for peanuts. Yeah. Chris, this has been very helpful. And I encourage people, obviously, to go and pick up the book. Can you tell people where they could reach out to you or find out more about Trust Insights or any of the other things you have, including the Marketing Over Coffee podcast, which we didn't even get to?
Sure. For my company, go to trustinsights.ai. For me personally, go to ChristopherSPenn.com. And for the book, go to AIforMarketersBook.com. Those are the three places to go. There's everything else, YouTube, Twitter, blah, 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 all that you can find from those places. But those are the easiest places to go.
Fantastic. I really appreciate it. And for those who have listened, I hope you got some good value out of this. If there's someone that you think could benefit from this very demystified view of AI, please share the episode with them. And if you have a chance to subscribe to future episodes or leave a comment on anything that you've heard today, I'd welcome you to catch up with me at Funnel Reboot or Hey Glenn S on any of the social channels.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.